So hello everybody, welcome to the latest in the Deckhive Introduces webinar series, where we get to meet some of the creators of the fabulous card decks that we have in the Deckhive library. And today I'm kind of happy but also a bit sad because we have the wonderful Kate Miles Roberts, but we don't have Bev. So Bev is Kate's partner in crime, and she's not feeling so good today, so unfortunately didn't feel that she would be able to give us the kind of input that she would like. So she's not here, unfortunately. So I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to connect with her down the line if you want to do that. But welcome, Kate. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much. Yes, nice to be here, Martin. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. And yeah, thanks for having your deck of cards in the library. So it looks like we've already lost one or two people who either dropped off or they just wanted to hear Bev and they're not interested in hearing you.
I'll try not to be offended, but I'm sure that it's all good. Nothing sinister.
I expect they'll reappear in a moment.
I'm sure.
So what we're going to do in a moment is kind of have a look at the card deck itself, and you can talk us through the origins of it and how you use it, and then ideally give us some practical examples of things that we can use the cards with, whether we're working face to face or in the virtual world using Deckhive. But before we get into that, it'd be good just to hear a bit about yourselves. So, you know, how did you end up working with Bev? What's the history of the two of you?
Wow, and it is history. Yeah, so Bev and I have worked together as the Clear Thinking Partnership for the last 15 years, but we worked together before that in a corporate career. We both worked for Argos, the kind of high street retailer, me in learning development, Bev in HR. And every now and then we got together and worked on projects and said, we should do this together. And in the end, we decided that that's what we would do. So we jacked in our proper jobs and we had a little bit of a punt and said, well, let's go and work for ourselves. And if it doesn't work, we can always get another job. And so 15 years later, probably quite unemployable now. Luckily, we haven't had to get a proper job. So here we are, yeah, having fun and just really enjoying being part of Clear Thinking and working with lots of other fabulous people too along the way, of whom some I recognise on the call. So it's really nice to see you.
So what is a typical kind of week, month or project for you guys these days? I know it varies. Lots as a small consultancy, doesn't it? But give us a flavour.
Yeah, I don't think anything's particularly typical. And that's the thing that we absolutely love about working for with each other and for Clear Thinking, is that there's no typical day, but the sort of philosophy behind Clear Thinking is kind of creating conditions to help people think really well. So I guess that's the theme that runs through all of the clients that we have. We tend to work with relatively big-ish corporates. I guess that's our background, so that's where we're drawn to. But really, it's around working with good people, nice human beings who want to work better together, to collaborate well, to kind of to think well and to speak their truth. So it's sometimes small SLT type groups, sort of leadership teams. Sometimes it's bigger teams, wider sort of projects. So a real variety, which is the thing that I like best, I think. But the theme, like I say, is about helping people really think well and creating good conditions for that to happen.
So would you describe what you do mostly as coaching, or is it broader than that?
I think it would be broader than that. So I think facilitation would probably be the thing that I would call it. Just allowing people to come together, eliminate obstacles, really talk about what's going on for them, helping people remove some assumptions that they might be making, to problem solve. So to be creative with each other, to really kind of help all of those brains work better together to create something amazing. So yeah, it doesn't matter about the kind of, the environment that people work in. It really is about bringing them together in that kind of collaborative form. So yes, I guess from a coaching point of view, asking really good questions, standing back, being able to shut up and let good thinking happen, which, being able to shut up is not always my forte, but I do try hard.
Excellent. And so how did you come to the realization a set of cards would be a useful tool in that kind of purpose?
Yeah, so the cards actually do go back quite a long time. I was thinking about this today. probably 10 years ago, I reckon, maybe even more, we knew that when we got people in a room together, it was really great to have something that stimulated good conversations. And so we were looking for something that was that shortcut. And so we created a really small deck of cards. So I think 15 in total at the beginning. And they were just there as conversation prompts, something to get people talking, to share their perspective on something really sort of simple. And what we found was they were really useful. So I guess we sort of just thought about them in a very simplistic way. But actually, the thing that we've realized over the years as they have developed is that their simplicity probably is the power that they have as well. So I was looking out, so I found a set of the original cards. So this one says curiosity, and you'll notice that it has a little kind of description underneath. And I guess when we started, we thought that that would be really helpful to people to kind of have a word and have something that kind of got them thinking. And actually the thing that we have realized over the years is less is more. So being artfully vague, just having, so the new curiosity, so it was curiosity, now it's curious. And the new cards are artfully vague. They do allow people to do their own personal thinking, not directed by what we think it should be, just that tiny spark of inspiration that gets people talking. So yeah, that's really been the kind of power that the cards have given us.
So was that quite an early on revelation that actually would be helpful to remove some of that kind of content?
Yeah, definitely. So they've been through all sorts of iterations. So we removed the words and then we removed the picture for a bit, but then we realized that probably wasn't really helpful. But then we added an other side to the cards. So they became double-sided and then they became visual again. So the combination of the picture and the word feels like the most powerful way that the cards work, because some people are drawn to the picture and that stimulates and sparks some thought and some insight, and others are really curious about the word. Some people, sort of say that wouldn't be my word, it would be a different word that I would use. And so any kind of iteration of it is great because it sparks the right conversation for that kind of moment. So you're just showing some of the cards there, which is good. And I guess it reminds me to say that I suppose the cards that we started off with were quite straightforward, very business focused kind of words that you might have. So appreciative, balanced, bold, curious. And then as the deck has developed, we've put all sorts of different words into it. So maybe ones that you wouldn't automatically use in a business context. So playful or restless or humble or kind. But the deck has grown, I guess, in diversity, allowing for even more wide and deep conversations. Sometimes people love the word, sometimes people say there's a word missing. And so that's the opportunity for them to add to it. So, from a Deckhive point of view, you can pop a word on a Post-it note. It's really easy for people to very quickly personalize the cards to the situation that they find themselves in right now.
So it's very much about where the client wants to take the conversation, really. For you, it doesn't matter whether they choose one of these words on here or if they choose something very different.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what we found is that instead of saying to people, just have a conversation about whatever it is, giving them these 52 cards gives them just a nice little scaffolding for the conversation. So some of the thinking is done for them in terms of here's a bunch of words that could be useful. And quite often people will then dive straight into the conversation and pick something that jumps out at them. Or it could be that conversation that says, oh, I'm searching through them all and there's something missing. I'd like to talk about this instead. So that becomes a really helpful, very gentle scaffolding that allows people to ease into conversation very quickly. So you've just popped an unfeeling. I hope that I'm not sort of giving off an unfeeling vibe there, Martin, but I think it's a really nice sort of prompt that says, the cards are double-sided. And the other side of the cards, so we used to call it the dark side, but actually I think that we've iterated that into the other side because it's a different perspective. there isn't necessarily a wrong perspective, it's just a different perspective on that word. And that has really given some power to the cards, because it opens up all sorts of different conversations. I think it allows people to, maybe from their own personal point of view, think about, well, maybe how am I limiting myself? What am I assuming about me or about somebody else? What am I assuming about the team that I'm working with? What feedback would I love to give somebody? And the cards just ease you into that gentle conversation that is rich and powerful. And the dark side, the other side, that flip side, is equally as important as the more positive, as you would see it, kind of coloured side of the card as well. So I had just a quick example that sort of springs to mind. So intentional is one of the cards. And I was using a physical deck of cards. I was actually in a room with some people the other day, which was amazing in itself. And we had the cards and we were using them. And the guy who was in charge of the team had the intentional card, but he'd flipped it over, and he was looking at haphazard. And he was saying to the team, actually, I want to talk to you about haphazard, because you might think that I am quite haphazard in the way that I approach things, but actually haphazard, which is the flip side of intentional, haphazard is the thing that I do that allows me to get curious, get all of the information that I need before I make a good decision that then we can stick to and work towards. So he was really keen to talk about haphazard, which probably wasn't a conversation that he has ever had with them before, but it just allowed him to have that conversation, and to just give all of his team just a little bit more insight into the way that he works, perhaps to give them a bit of comfort, perhaps to feel a bit more understood. So that flip side, a really important part of them.
Yeah, I can see how that adds a lot of value, and the words themselves really kind of grab you, don't they? They're, like you said earlier, not always words that you would use in a workplace, or even some of them, I guess, aren't words that we would typically use a lot in conversation generally, but that there's something about them that's really quite curious, I suppose, pulls you in to kind of, well, what do you mean by that word? So as simple as they are and short as they are, it kind of, I can see how it evolves into a conversation that takes you further.
Absolutely. So like you see the restless ants, and that came from a business I worked with, actually, who, what part of their value set was restless for a reason. And I loved restless because restless felt like you were always on the go. You were looking for the next thing. You were not content with the status quo. So you've got those little restless ants who are scurrying down a hole. And that photo I took in Portugal. So very nearly all of the photos on the cards are either photos that me or Bev have taken. Quite often they include our family. So Curious is my husband and two of my boys. Kind, the one that you see on, is a card which is from one of our good friends, and that's his kids. So almost all, every card bar 6 of them are pictures that are personal to us or the people that we work with. So I guess for us, it gives them that really lovely connection as well.
Yeah. So I'm guessing those ants were huge then. If they were from Portugal, they're probably
yeah, massive, scary big ants. But I think you're right in terms of those sort of cards and words that you wouldn't always use. There's another one. So I've got a paperweight on my desk at the moment, which is a glass heart, and it's the visual that we use for vulnerable. And so vulnerable always really sparks a good conversation, because a lot of people say, surely that vulnerable should be the other side, the dark side of the card. The dark side of vulnerable is bulletproof. And so some people really want to have that flipped around. They want to think that bulletproof is a superpower and that vulnerability isn't. So just the ability to have that really open conversation with people opens up such a wide conversation. It's amazing. It really is.
Yeah. So and then maybe we can talk through some examples of the ways in which you kind of use them practically, and when you've seen them have the greatest impact, those kind of things. But
yeah,
before we get into that, was there anything else you wanted to mention around kind of the background and to how you got to this point, or should we just dive into some examples?
No, I think that, they kind of, I love that they are pretty simple. You can pick them up and go, oh, I get this. And the thing about the simplicity of them is you can use them in such a variety of ways. So when I'm in the the world that we used to work in, that was rock up to somewhere and do something, you can either use them in a really structured way to have some great questions planned that allow people's thinking to really kind of move in a very systematic way from one point to the next, or you can just kind of rock up, grab them out of your pocket and just use them in some way, pick a card or give people the cards to use. And so using them in an online situation is absolutely, it's the same experience, just in a slightly different way. But yeah, I'd love to give you some examples.
So where should we start with that then? What would you like to share as a starting point?
So I think in table 3, I've just mocked up an example. So this was me using the cards a little while back with an NHS team who were embedded. So they were a finance team who were embedded within the NHS. And the challenge that they had was being able to collaborate across the silos of, we're an embedded team versus you are a team who really work here. And they were finding some real tension going on. So I was drafted in. I was told that they were a bit of a difficult team to work with, which, it's always joyous to be told that before you start working with people. I always ignore that because I don't think that often is the truth. So I approached them, but I was armed with my cards. And one of the first activities that we did was just to get all of the cards out on the table and to get them to think about what are the strengths that you recognize working within this team. So they were able to have a really good conversation, to do some real debate. So when you use the cards in a real kind of live situation, you'll see people picking them up and waving them about and holding them and showing them to people because they get really passionate about wanting to share the story that sits for them behind the card that they're choosing. And so debate went on, but they'd been asked to put them into this kind of diamond ranking. So with the thing that they absolutely held as most important at the top of the diamond all the way through. But obviously they had to pick 9 out of the 52. So that's a bit of a feat in itself in terms of all of the cards are very positive in their intention. So to be able to pick 9 is quite a challenge, but they got there. So this was kind of their thought around themselves. And I guess the way that they got there was through a really deep and rich and interesting conversation that went off in lots of different sort of ways, but they were able to kind of come to this conclusion. Then the next,
how much of that process was facilitated by you, and how much did they self-manage that discussion?
Very self-managed. So I like to be able to set it up, allow people to know what they're doing, and then to just let people get on with it. So that's that bit that I talked about at the beginning, that standing back and keeping your mouth shut, I think really important at this point, because it's their conversation to have. You know that they can be guided by the cards. It really helps them as a very sort of wide scaffold, but it really allows that deep and rich conversation to happen. I think the only time that I'd ever intervene is if things had dried up, or maybe if it felt like there was some kind of somebody dominating, but just allowing them to kind of have that respectful conversation between themselves.
Yeah. Really and important. How long did that process take to do this part of the activity?
So sometimes you can kind of, I guess it depends what time you've got, but allowing enough time, but not too much, because people can just pontificate. So I would say probably 15 minutes is okay. You can shorten it and make people do it really quickly, or you can give them a little bit more time, I guess, dependent on the time that you've got. Okay. So at that point, you've got a view, or you've got the team have got a view of themselves, and it's very much from their own perspective. And then as you kind of slide across, the next thing I asked them to do was to get a perspective from a different team that they worked with, and think about putting themselves in that team's shoes and saying, well, what would they say about us as a team from the outside looking in? And I think that's where the really interesting conversations start to happen, because obviously they're making some assumptions, but they were able to have the same conversation, but put themselves in the marketing team's shoes and look at them from that perspective. And the one thing you notice is they choose very different cards. Some of them are the same, but quite a few of them are different. And what tends to happen when you give people this activity is they start to choose the other side of the cards to describe the team, which is never a thing that they choose for themselves. So obviously they start to get this rich insight, standing and looking from a different perspective, as to how do we impact, how do we come across. And so once they've decided that a marketing team might say that we are detached, then you're able to flip the card over as a real kind of quick and dirty way of saying, well, if you think that detached is the way that you come across, how might you be more engaged with them? So just even by just flicking the card over and looking at the coloured side starts to give that team some clues as to how they might work differently with the team that they are thinking about. So it really is interesting that the perspective that they take is very different.
I can see how just naturally that moves you then into an approach goal kind of orientation rather than an avoidance goal, which we know, is more likely to get the kind of results you're after. So it feels very different, doesn't it, when you're considering what you want to become?
Absolutely. And the other thing that you can do is you can get them to say, well, what would say, we've talked about marketing. Well, what about another team? Let's choose a different team. Would they say exactly the same thing, or do we behave differently with them? So you really start to see consistency and inconsistency in terms of the relationship as a team that you have with other people in the organization.
Fab. So, and I can see how, of course, if you're having this kind of discussion within a group and using Deckhive, then the ability to add a sticky note and kind of add commentary into there, could also be a useful feature, couldn't it? Because people can capture their own notes in there, whatever they like,
absolutely,
and refer back to that later on.
The other thing that I think is a real bonus in Deckhive is that you can split the team up into smaller subdivisions, and you can give them all a table, and they can all have that question, what are the strengths that you recognize in this team? And then they can come back together and almost compare workings and say, well, our conversation went down this route. This is what we think the team demonstrates. And it might be very similar or very different. And just that similarity or difference can give you a view on that kind of the collaborative nature of the team and what individuals are seeing and feeling like they're bringing to the team as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and if you didn't spot it earlier on, the numbers at the bottom of the screen, you can see there. So we're on table 3 at the moment, but we can go back to table 1 and we can go to table 2 and so on. And these are all separate spaces. Anybody in a session can go to any of those spaces, but it just means you've given people a bit of space to work in so they don't get on top of each other. And we use that a lot with breakout groups. It works really well to give people their own little space to work in together. And as you say, then they can go and review what each other have done when you want to bring it back into a plenary as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So I'm just thinking about other examples. So we've used the cards as a real backbone of programs. So Bev's been working really closely with a big theatre currently, and obviously that kind of slightly cultural reinvention, sort of how do we get back to sort of running in this post-COVID world? So that kind of business reinvention and energizing. And she's used them in lots of different ways. So sometimes it's just pick a card that themes the whole conversation that a team might have, allowing everybody to have the same card and sort of just to talk about their perspective on it. She's also looked at, there's an ideas lab that she's running with them. So often the ideas come forward, and then you can look at the cards and say, well, what are the behaviors that are really going to supercharge these ideas? What are going to allow us to bring them to fruition? So lots of different ways of kind of using the cards to stimulate some thinking. One of the ways is really nice to just pick maybe 3 cards that feel like they don't go together and get people to create a story around those cards and what those 3 different behaviors combined might give them as a sort of superpower. So you can be so creative with such a simple, I think that's the thing, the kind of simplicity thing really does allow you to be very creative with how you use them. So you've kind of gone on to this prepared versus playful. And I think that sometimes it's really lovely to feel prepared. Prepared could just be that I've got 3 or 4 great questions that I'm going to ask the team, and we're going to use the cards to explore them. And I guess the playful card I pulled out was really about almost handing it over to the the team to choose the cards that they want to have a conversation about, or to choose the cards that tell a story about the team over the last week or month or year, or tell a story about the future vision for the team as well. So the past is a great place to lurk around in terms of that sort of just review and reflection. The right now, how do we feel about ourselves? What's it like to be part of this team in the here and now? But also that future focus part as well, around where are we aspiring to? What are those cards that might be in our future that we perhaps don't see and wouldn't pull out of the deck right now?
Yeah. So it sounds like you still have fun with them then, even though you've been using them for quite a few years now. You're still finding different ways to use it as a resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more people who use them, the more really creative ways that they do use them as a resource. So Lynn, who's on the call today, or was, yes, there you are, Lynn. Hello. So Lynn's used them with an art project for young people and came up with some absolutely beautiful stuff, just stimulated by some of the words in the cards. So they can be really simple, or you can make them, you can make the kind of combination as complex as you like.
Yeah. Do you want to say a bit more about that project? So how did that work, and what was if somebody else wanted to do something similar, to use the cards in that way, can you say some more about it? Or
sorry, did you want me to say that?
Yeah, that'd be brilliant, Lynn. You know more about it than I do.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. I thought you were actually asking me. Yeah, it's my friend does art classes for young people, and I covered for her. And yeah, the project was to consider a feeling and then create their own card that represented a feeling. So I used the cards for clear thinking to stimulate the thoughts around what kind of feelings might you experience, what kind of feelings might you want to focus on, and then create your own card, your own piece of art that represents that for you, so that you can take that back home as a reminder to focus on. So
thank you, Lynn. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, and I know that often people do struggle to articulate feelings, don't they? They don't have the vocabulary front of mind. So if you can provide that structure to get them started, then often running them once they've kind of latched on to what they want to say. So I can see the link there between something that provides that stimulus and then allows that creativity for them to make it their own. I think that's really important with all these kind of tools. I think that's one of the greatest and most powerful things about using cards, actually, is that the ownership so much more easily sits with the end user, doesn't it? That they can make the choices their own and the stories their own that come out of it.
I think so. And I also think that often when you're sort of faced with, come up with the way that you behave as a team, it's very easy to use a very shallow kind of remit in terms of the words that you might think about, whereas the cards give you a whole bunch of options, and so allow you to take your thinking much more widely anyway. Because I think we quite often default to a very shallow sort of small pool of ideas, whereas this is just by default a few more for people to kind of have a little play around with, and either have a really adverse reaction and really not enjoy it at all, or absolutely love, the kind of thought or the card or the picture or whatever that might be.
Did you want to say something about the table 2 stuff that's laid out there as well? What have we got on here?
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to, and I suppose I've spoken a little bit about it already, but the other side of the cards is important not to forget. It's funny because I've got a physical pack of cards and I keep them on my desk, and they are always coloured side up, but coloured side down is also it's such a great stimulus for other conversations that people might shy away from, might just not be ready for, but they again give us a little bit of scaffolding, and also maybe, I think the thing that we've noticed is they perhaps depersonalize some of the kind of thinking, but not in a bad way, but just allow people to be able to have some conversations that say, these are 3 behaviors that I absolutely recognize and love, and actually there's this one that I think, I'd like to share some feedback around, whatever it might be, that just gets people thinking in a different way. But also I put selfish on there because there is some gold in all of the dark side. I gave you my little tale about haphazard already, but selfish is one of those cards. So generous is the flip side of selfish. And wouldn't we all want to be generous? But actually there probably is a time and a place to be selfish. And I think that particularly when we're all working from home, that the kind of distinction between work life and home life is a little bit more blurred, then actually having those conversations about when is selfish a good thing to be for yourself? How is selfish keeping you well? So just kind of challenging people to look at the other side and to see what is the gold in there is a very interesting activity. And, I suppose I'm looking at superficial and thinking, can I find some gold in superficial? But maybe I can. Maybe that's for another discussion. Who knows? But yeah, that just sort of that ability to be able to look at that other side and to have the conversation about it. I know that Lauren was on the call. I don't know if I can see you, Lauren, but you are here, I think. And Lauren was telling me the other day about a situation where someone had come into. She's got a physical deck of cards, and the cards were there. So Lauren, would you be able to share that little? Could you share that story with us? Because it was a great story and I probably won't do it justice.
Yeah, which one? I've told you so many stories about
the so the story about the guy who picked up a card and was then sort of suddenly really uncovering all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, so it was a live kind of a coaching session that my colleague was doing, and they were talking about kind of a bit around intention setting, which is another really, really fabulous way to use the cards. And actually what came out was he was kind of lingering over critical, and my friend said to him, what let's take this aside for a moment. What I noticed you picking up that card. You got any thoughts on that particular word? And he went, yeah, it's just bringing a lot of stuff back for me about criticism that I kind of received a long time ago that I don't know if I've ever let go of. And so they got into a really different conversation, and she said, what is this thing that stayed with you? And the conversation went from intention setting around goals they need to achieve, in the team for next year, to there's some criticism that I received many years ago that I've never let go of, and it's actually impacting my performance as a leader and how I show up for others. So yeah, really fascinating conversation. And she came out of it and went, the cards are magic. I said, yes, I know, I told you. So yeah, really, I can't speak highly of them enough. There's many stories like that where maybe the original purpose is kind of yeah, you can meet a lot what you set out to, but also you can uncover some real gems as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Yeah, it's really nice to hear that kind of example. It's a lovely phrase, isn't it, when people say that they've been magic, they are magic, they've created those kind of insights and surprises, I suppose. That's lovely. So, and are you often surprised, Kate, with the stories that you hear about how the cards have been used or what they've managed to create somehow? I guess usually it's not just they don't do it on their own necessarily. It's a skill of the facilitator, of course, that makes a difference.
Yeah, and I think that I never cease to be surprised at how a simple deck of cards can elicit such good conversation. And we do get people telling us all the time about the way that they've used them, and people can be so. I think it's that less is more thing, isn't it? Because they are quite pared back and simple, it allows people to be really creative in the way that they use them. And so that is never ending kind of source of amazement, but also just kind of real joy that people like them as much as we do, because we have always found them such useful resource, either in your back pocket or something that you can structure a whole series of conversations based around. But yeah, so they kind of are an unending source of surprise, and it's a really nice feeling that has elicited such good, deep, rich, different, insightful conversations.
Yeah. So, and what's your thoughts about how this might then translate onto Deckhive, into the digital world, and what are your hopes for where this might kind of take these opportunities and these kind of conversations in this realm?
So I think when we came across Deckhive, Bev and I were like, yay, we found the place where the cards can pretty much as well as you can online be themselves. And so that just that ability to be able to select, to create something, whatever that is, that visual story, but also to flip them over, to use both sides of the cards equally. So important, because yes, you can create a slide deck that has the pictures in them, but just that ability to move them around, to group them together, to look at different people's versions of the truth on different tables, to look at all of the dark side or all of the kind of coloured side. So I think that we were thrilled that there was something that almost represents the same feeling that the cards give you. Well, I think they do, just in a different way, but so super versatile. That I think that there's just a brilliant translation of that. If you can't be in a room and throw them onto a desk and have everybody look at them, well, this is such a great way of doing it. And what better way to pull people from around the world into that as well, because the teams that we work with more and more aren't always based in the same place anyway. So why not have that ability for everybody to feel that they do have an equal seat at the table? Because I think that equality of contribution is definitely something that the kind of Deckhive experience gives you.
Yeah, it's important, isn't it? Because, as you say, going forward, there'll be more and more hybrid meetings and hybrid teams where we're going to have to find ways to help them to contribute equally and to feel like they're included. And I think it's important we evolve these kind of tools to provide that, because cards have been so valuable in those kind of face-to-face facilitated conversations. I think they need to find a home in this kind of either purely online or hybrid kind of world. So I'm glad you found us and that we were able to kind of provide a home for cards for clear thinking in this space. So were there any other points you wanted to cover that we haven't mentioned already around kind of how the cards can be used, or top tips, I suppose, for people who are wanting to use them in their work?
So top tips, I would say, think about what it is that you're, it's that kind of begin with the end in mind. What is it that you want to achieve in terms of the conversation? Have some good questions up your sleeve. Allow the conversation, as you were saying before, Martin, allow the conversation to be really placed into the hands of the group that you're working with. I think that it can be very light touch in terms of the facilitation that you give it. I think, giving some structure, giving some ease that allows people to do that good thinking, really important. I think that one of the things that I've noticed as I've been using them more recently is giving people that time to scroll through the deck. So not being afraid to give some good, just white noise, allow people to do some thinking, to do some choosing, and then to kind of come forward with their thoughts. Because I think if you had a pack or you have them out on the table, then you can see all of them. It's just giving people that opportunity to make some good choices or to do some good thinking before they put them onto the table, so they don't feel rushed and hurried. The other thing that I've used and used Deckhive for is that to allow people to go in and have a look at the cards ahead of time and to make some choices before the session. So then when they come to the session, they feel prepared. So you don't always have to do all of it at the same time, I guess, is one of those top tips as well, to allow people to do some good thinking individually and then to come together to kind of share their thoughts. So and just a practical point around that, when you're using Deckhive, one of the limitations in our current design is that you have to be there as the host in the session. So if you're going to have people come in and spend time prior to a session, it's important that you are active or have the session open in one of your browser windows while they're doing that, otherwise they won't be able to get in. So that's something that may well change at some point down the line, but currently that is designed for that kind of in the moment kind of engagement, as it were. When I think about it, you also have some resources, don't you, or a downloadable document that users of Deckhive can download and get some further sort of guidance and so on from. There's an ABC of reflection that is there to download, and actually if you download it, it's a PDF that you can write into and use as an actual kind of resource that you build and create for yourself, which might be just a nice another introduction to how else you might use the cards, because they are, we've talked a lot about using them with teams, but actually as a resource for one-to-one coaching, they are really, really helpful, but also just from a reflective kind of just for yourself, that kind of self-reflection tool as well, really, really helpful.
Well, in a moment, there'll be an opportunity for questions from anybody who is here who would like to ask a question. So have a think about that. If you have a question, then feel free to add that into the chat, or you can unmute in just a second. While you're gathering your thoughts around that, I was just going to share with you just a bit about the platform itself, about Deckhive, for those of you who haven't seen it before. So you'll have gathered from what you've seen so far today already, I'm sure, that it's an online system where you can move the cards around, flip them over, etc., etc. And just as Kate was saying, trying to replicate as best we can what we get from cards in the real world when we take them into a digital space. But there are a number of different decks in the library. So I think we now have 23 decks with the new addition of Bill's cards, who's on the call today. So Bill's cards were just added yesterday. So another one for you to go and have a look at. And if you're on one of our paid plans, either the starter plan or the unlimited plan, then you get access to all of those decks, and you can use them in any number of different ways. So whatever it is that suits you and your clients best, there is likely to be a deck of cards there that can be really helpful. So yeah, we hope that it's a useful resource, and it's still very new and it's still evolving. So we are always very open and very grateful for any feedback that you have about how it worked or otherwise for you, because that can help us to continue the development and improvement of the system. So that's what it is. I encourage you to go and have a play if you haven't already, and to see how it can work for you. We always recommend people practice before you use it in a live situation. You don't have to, but it does help things to go smoothly if you can do that. So any questions from anybody before we kind of move towards a close? So I can't see any in the chat yet, but feel free to. I can see some. Katie's shaking her head. Does that mean we've covered everything already?
Always good to see the thumbs up. Thank you, Katie.
It's always one of those kind of moments, isn't it? You think, how long do you leave it before you decide that there are no questions? Someone's just about to hit enter on the chat with a killer question. But a comment from Lucy saying that she can't wait to use these cards. So that's good.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, I hope that you really enjoy using them. I'm sure you will.
Yeah. And what would Bev want to say if she wasn't, if she was here? So what's she going to say to you afterwards? Oh, Kate, you didn't tell me.
I know. I told her that she wasn't allowed to watch it back even, because there'd be so many things that I didn't say. I think that she'd probably just reiterate the versatility of them, and that we've got ways that we use them, but we, like I said before, other people who know the cards too find so many different ways. So don't be limited by the ways that we've talked about. Just go off and have a little play and see what else springs to mind, because I guarantee there will be something else that you find that we haven't even thought of. And if you do, let us know. Yeah,
so how can people get in touch with you? And if someone's watching the recording and they have the killer question that they're desperate to ask you, how can they find you?
So you can find us at our website, which is clearthinkinguk.com, or you can email us at hello@clearthinkinguk.com, or you can track us down on LinkedIn. I don't think there are too many Kate Miles Roberts, so you'll be able to find us, or Bev Holden. But yes, or some way through, obviously on Deckhive, there's a little place where we hang out, so you can click through on any of those links as well. But we absolutely love to hear from people. We have a card school at the end of every month, so if you're interested in the cards and thinking about using them differently, then you can come to that for free as well. So there's just lots of opportunities to think about how we might use them differently in the future.
I love that phrase, card school. That sounds like a fun place to hang out.
It is. Come along.
Yeah, we should do. Excellent. Well, yeah, thank you ever so much, Kate, for talking us through. I think it really helps when you can see examples and you can hear the story about kind of how you've got to where you are. It really helps to kind of stimulate the imagination about practical ways that you can start to use the cards. And I guess, for me, one of the main takeaways is there isn't a right and wrong, and therefore it opens the door to just try something and see how you get on and evolve and adapt and make it work for you and for your clients. So that sounds like a fun thing to do.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So thanks everybody for joining today. And if you haven't already seen the recordings of all of our other Deckhive Introducer sessions, then please do go and check those out on our YouTube channel. So there's plenty of content there to keep you busy. So we hope lots of useful food for thought there. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you at a future one. I can't remember when the next one is, but it's coming up before too long. I think it's Sarah Lewis talking about the positive organizational development cards. So I think that's our next session, possibly in about a month. So, but yeah, thanks again for seeing you and for coming along, and we'll see you again soon.